Guys, I think she's the one. I know a Jenny, a Jenny, and she's so great. Turns out Jenny is a real dive watch history buff and shares my taste in vivid designs and so much more. A perfect fit? Let's explore Jenny watches history with this lemony Sealab dive watch from the early 70s on the TiMEworn channel. Jenny watches goes all the way back to 1963, founded as the Jenny et Compagnie SA in Lengnau, Switzerland by one Paul Jenny. His father Gustav already produced watches for other brands before, but since '63, Jenny could also be found on the dial. It was a tough competition to start in, but Jenny specialized on dive watches like no other. And in this rare instance, I can also report that the company remained in family hands well into the 2010 years, and even along the 2012 relaunch of the brand, family members were still involved. In its many decades of existence, Jenny became more than just another watch manufacturer. Much like Chronograph Suisse, their models and innovations transcended their own branding, and the company became a supplier of many other well-known vintage brands like Philip Watch, Oleg & Weiss, Fortis, Dugena, Aquadive, and many more. But in contrast to Chronograph Suisse, Jenny watches were always still recognizable as such, either via the distinguishable fish logo on various parts of the case or a signage on the dial. No reason to forego such a quality reference in case of Jenny parts. They already started out strong with the CARRIBEAN 700 series, but just 1 year after opening its doors, the Jenny et Compagnie SA unveiled its most prominent contribution to the dive watch industry, which can be found not only on the dial, but also in pioneering patents. Specialized diving bezels and cases to venture as deep as 1000 meters, or at least achieve the appropriate depth rating in the lab standard test. Not to make it sound less interesting than it is, because what a feature! It was achieved with their so-called triple safe technology, including their patented monoblock case and 3 seals together with a pneuelastic encasing for the inner spacer, which acts as a shock absorber for the mostly ETA movements. Additionally, the screw-down crown was safeguarded thrice with seals as well. Other famous dive model series by illustrious brands like Seiko, Breguet, IWC, Omega, DOXA and Rolex in that same era sported water resistance ratings of 200 to 300 meters. 1000 meters remained off limits, considering series production, for these larger brands up until the late 70s and 80s, when for example the Crown or Tag Heuer finally entered the ring. But the real championship belt was already gone by then. In general, it is a nightmare to set up any kind of chronological order, since there were so many variants within all of the model lines, many of them released simultaneously. Being colorful was part of the identity.
A choice of rotating bezels in matching color shades is offered so that you can purchase a watch best suited to your personality,
it read back then. And it struck a chord with many visitors when Jenny was first opened to the public eye at the Basel Watch Fair, Schweizer Uhrenmesse. Anyway, aside the CARRIBEAN lineup carrying the 1000 meter range, there were 2 others. The Sealab, we'll get to this one in a minute, and the Fascination series. The latter is often omitted, as it is a bit out of depth, meaning dressy compared to the other specialized model lines. Back to the historic timeline, in 1997, and this might be a surprise to you, the Jenny family bought up DOXA. That's right, DOXA came under the weather in the 80s during the quartz crisis. Romeo F. Jenny took over as CEO. Therefore, the headquarters of DOXA moved to Biel, and in the following years, the focus remained on revitalizing DOXA. Therefore, Jenny watches lay dormant until 2012, the aforementioned rebirth of the brand, which was spearheaded by the CARRIBEAN 300 50th anniversary re-edition lineup, which design-wise harks back to the earliest CARRIBEAN 700 model. A little confusing with the numbers. With a few minor changes. Size increase from 40 to 42 mm, from domed acrylic to flat sapphire crystal, slightly adapted lugs, and a swordfish or marlin logo on the crown and caseback. 10 years later, 2022, the 60th anniversary models marked the current state of Jenny and their latest models. I think you can find a lot of info about those new ones, so I will finally set my gaze upon this beautiful 70s Jenny Sealab in a lemon yellow. We've talked a lot about the poster boy of Jenny, the CARRIBEAN. But the Sealab line was not to be dismissed as dive watch material, and the range included at least 13 different reference numbers according to diveintowatches.com. There's also a wild Sealab alarm watch with a secondary locking crown, but I digress. The Sealab series in general was positioned as the cheaper alternative to the Caribbean, which makes it an excellent bargain for us vintage worshippers, but more on that later. The name of the line possibly, and this is entirely my own deduction from the matching era and topic, references to the famous Sealab experiments of the 60s by the US Navy, which should attest to the ability of working and living in an underwater habitat for extended periods of time. Check out Watches of Espionage's article linked in the description if you're interested about that. The one I have right here bears the reference 1946-1 in a 37mm tonneau-shaped case, with brushed top and polished sides. The bidirectional bakelite or acrylic bezel matches in color and completes the vibrant picture of this watch. The 2mm high domed acrylic on top gives it a total thickness from bottom to acrylic ceiling of 14mm. And the 20mm lugs are hidden, and I have it on a rather simple non-original 5-link bracelet. I think a beads of rice would be in order for this watch, but the old advertisements suggest a very interesting original option. Tough to find though. The knurled crown is screw down and fairly large, or easily operable, but no logo on it. Maybe that was a downside of being the more affordable lineup? Additionally, it does not feature the monoblock design of the famous Caribbean, but a traditional screw-in caseback. But the watch was 200-meter water resistant nonetheless, so definitely up to any aquatic expedition back then. The dial takes center stage, no doubt about it. Not only lemon yellow in color, but the macro lens also reveals its almost porous structure, much like a citrusy skin after all. The silver inner ring on it frames the high contrast tritium indices quite well, which are in such a great condition that I was almost certain that a relume happened at some point. Luckily, it seems to have been a professional job, or it is truly a NOS new old stock piece as it was advertised. I especially enjoy that the numbers on the bezel are fully lumed as well. The blocky hands complete the frontal view together with the quite prominent day-date window at 3 o'clock. It definitely looks like a little brother of the Caribbean. A more office-suitable brother, maybe. The caseback is a no-thrills affair, but the advertised movement inside was a different story. This one supposedly housed the Schild 1906, a movement used for example in the Jaeger-LeCoultre Club from the same era. A fact which seemingly elevates the status of this movement, but it was in fact an affordable choice, which makes sense in the Sealab lineup but was an outlier for JLC. A push into the more affordable bracket for them, and something, meaning using a third-party movement, JLC never repeated as far as I know. I still think it would be somewhat of a badge of honor for this watch, and a solid movement at the least. But if you listened carefully, I added the word supposedly at the beginning of this segment, because after opening it up, this watch in fact houses the ETA 2789. Nearly identical specs and functions to the AS 1906, but a more standard quickset function on the first position of the crown instead of a pushing mechanism. This movement is also correct for the era of this watch, and ETAs were the most common movement options in Jennys in general. So only a small surprise there. About the price, that's a finicky topic. These are rare in general. Prices for Caribbeans are seemingly off the charts and appropriate at the same time. With that in mind, the Sealab was and still is the cheaper alternative. I wanted this one bad, since it was the perfect combination of NOS condition, size and color for the Jenny in my life. I paid 1,100 euros, which is a good price in my opinion, but it should only be considered as a loose reference, since I think the price range is open to either sides. The history and pertinence of the Jenny brand justify these prices, even though I would not go much higher myself, given the case size and standing of the Sealab series itself. It is definitely a unique proposition in terms of color and style, and especially a valuable target for any vintage dive watch enthusiast. Take good care of all your Jennys out there. And thanks to each and everyone who ventures with me into the weird and wonderful of the vintage watch world. See you in the next one on the TiMEworn channel.